Okay, so now let's get into the part that you might have been waiting for, the UI. And we're not going to be needing any of these files because we are going to create a new directory. I'm going to do that via the command line. So let's clear and let's navigate out of the video processing directory and make a new directory calling it the YouTube web client. The reason I'm not calling it like the front end or the UI is that we might in the future want like mobile apps for this as well. And that's a different type of client, like a mobile client or mobile app or whatever. Then let's navigate into that directory. And in our case, we're going to be using the Next.js framework. We're going to be using Next.js 13, and we're going to use the most modern features like the app directory. At a high level, Next.js is referred to as a meta framework for React. It's kind of building features on top of React, like server-side rendering and some other things that we're going to see in just a second. But we can create a new Next app by running this command, npx create next app. And we probably want to add at latest, though I'm not even sure if that's required. Oh, I have npx twice. I have it on the above line as well. So let me fix that. And we're going to create it in the current directory. So I'm going to put a dot. We're already inside the YouTube web client. We don't need to create a new directory. So I'm going to go ahead and enter this, but we're going to get a few prompts. In our case, we are going to use TypeScript. So I'm going to say yes to that. We do want ESLint. It's basically a static code analyzer. It'll kind of tell us if we're writing like any error-prone code. So it's good to have. And in our case, I'm not going to use Tailwind. You can feel free to if you'd like. But the goal of this course isn't to like show you how to build a UI. It's about showing you how to build like a full stack app from end to end and using tools to do that. And I think just using regular CSS is going to be fine for that. Would you like to use the source directory? I prefer to, but since it's the default, I'm just going to stick with no. And would you like to use the app router? This is kind of the new controversial feature about Next.js, but it seems like that's the direction that things are going in. So we are going to stick with that. It is pretty powerful. It's just that it's confusing for some people. And would we like to customize the default import alias? We're going to say no. Now we created it, and I'm going to kind of walk you through just the high level stuff. There is a lot going on, but it's not honestly as confusing as you might think. We're going to start with the package.json. I think that's always a good entry point because then you kind of see what kind of dependencies are we actually working with. And here you can see we already have some startup scripts. We have a script for development in local. We have a build script, and we have a start script that is probably going to be used in production. And we also have a lint step, which we can run to like check if there's any error prone code and things of that nature. Or even like sometimes linting can also be about like styling checks so that we can enforce like a consistent style throughout the project. Scrolling down to dependencies, we can see, yep, we have TypeScript, we have React version 18, and we have Next version 13.4. We also got ESLint installed, and we have the types for React as well. If we were just working with regular JavaScript, we probably wouldn't need these, but we do have them here. And you can see we had an auto-generated TypeScript config. We're a little bit familiar with this because we created one for our video processing service. This one is a bit bigger, but you can see that the include is kind of the important part. Exclude, it does exclude node modules just like we had earlier. Include, it's basically including all the TypeScript and TSX files, which we'll get into TSX in just a second. But that's about it for here. There is a README that will kind of walk you through some of the steps that we're going to cover and obviously link you to documentation if that's something you're interested in. I'm not going to be teaching you all about Next.js in this tutorial, so maybe you do want to take a deeper look. I'm going to be showing you how to use Next.js to build what we are trying to build, which is some YouTube functionality, particularly the upload functionality. And we have our ESLint, which basically configures our ESLint settings, and we're just extending from the Next.js configuration, which basically means that we're reusing that. It's not super important, so I won't go in depth. And within the public directory, we have a couple images, and we're going to be getting rid of these and replacing them in a bit. But they're just like Next.js logos and like Vercel logos. Vercel is the company that created Next.js, if you didn't know that. We have our node modules. I'm definitely not going to show you that. In our app directory, this is where all the code is, and this is kind of new. The alternative would be to use the pages directory, which is kind of the traditional way to do it, but Next.js 13 changed things up. We have the favicon, and this is something we're going to be replacing in a second. We have our global CSS, which basically applies to everything, and we're not going to be needing this, so I'm pretty much just going to be getting rid of all of this in a second, of course. We have our layout.tsx file. Now, the reason why it's a TSX file is because React uses JSX. So with every component, and this is a function, but it's actually a component in React, it's called a function component, they typically return something called JSX. it looks like HTML, but you can see that there are some subtle differences. Like here we have class name, and this is supposed to be a CSS class. Like we can't just call it a regular class. And the reason is because JavaScript or TypeScript doesn't know the difference between this type of class and like an actual object-oriented class like this. The interpreter wouldn't be able to tell you the difference between these two. That's why we have to create a separate name for it called class name. I know you didn't ask, but that's why. And you can see that there's an HTML element here, which kind of hints to you that the layout.tsx file is going to be the root of our page. It's kind of like the index.html. And within the body here, we can see that we're rendering children. In this case, children are going to be the components that we create and define. And we can kind of switch which component is rendered based on the router, specifically the Next.js router, which is pretty powerful and actually pretty easy to use. So I told you about JSX, and the reason this is a TSX is because we are using TypeScript, so that's just the convention. And going down here, you can see our first page, the page.tsx defined in the app directory. This is going to be the root page. So Next.js kind of has an implicit router. We don't explicitly have to write that like, oh, okay, at the root route, this is the component that we want to render. And at this route, maybe at the watch page, like where you're supposed to watch a YouTube video, this is the route that we want to render, like, you know, some other component. We don't explicitly have to do that because it's all based on the file names. Some people don't like that. I don't really mind because at least it's consistent. And when you open up a Next.js project, you kind of know immediately, oh, of course, that's the root page. And then I'll show you how to create sub pages as well in a bit. This is a very big page. We're not going to be going through it, but you can see it looks pretty much like HTML. And the main is pretty much like a div, but it's kind of semantic HTML, where like for people with disabilities who can't see, like a screen reader would kind of tell them that this is the main content of the page. And that makes sense because this home page is what's going to be rendered in this children element. By default, at least when we are on the root page, and I'll show you that in a second, but this is basically just a bunch of like Vercel logos, and I think it'll link you to some documentation and things like that. And for this page, we have some CSS. It's within a CSS module file. The naming is also going to match typically. These are both called page, and there's a bunch of CSS classes here, and the way they are actually used within that page, you'll see is kind of interesting. It's kind of different than you might expect if you're new to this, but you can see these CSS classes, main, description, and going into this file, you can see we are importing styles from that module, and then we are using them with class name styles.main, styles.description, styles.code. There, you can imagine there's a code class somewhere in that CSS file. I'm sure we can find it. Yep, it's right here. So that's kind of a consistent way to do it. So you don't have to like worry too much about typing out the names correctly here. Well, you kind of do because the CSS class name has to go after styles, but that's like the convention here. And that's about all I think I want to show you. But now we can probably go ahead and actually run this, and I'll show you how to do that in just a second. Well, just to confirm, and if you ever forget, you can always go in the package JSON. You can see that this is how we want to develop. So I'm going to open up the terminal. I'm going to clear real quick, and I'm going to run npm run dev, and that will start this script, which under the hood is going to call next dev. So let's run that. And it started up pretty quickly. Well, I guess it's still compiling, but we see that it's going to, by default, be shown at localhost 3000. So I'm going to go ahead and open that up. So I'm going to open up a new tab. We don't need to look at our cloud resources. Maybe you have nightmares from how confusing it was, or maybe you thought it was really interesting, but let's see this. So yeah, you can see it's just kind of linking us to a bunch of documentation, and it tells us that if we edit our page.tsx, it will change this page. And just to prove it to you, I'm going to pretty much delete that page. So going into our page.tsx over here, I'm going to get rid of most of this code, but I'll leave something, I guess everything down from this div. So I'm actually just going to collapse it in VS Code like that, and then delete that. Looks like we actually have a lot more. Yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and actually collapse all of these. Well, it's just a couple, and let's delete that. So what should we have left? Let's scroll up. Basically, just that code link that tells us we can still edit this page, which is technically true, but we deleted most of it. So now let's go back. Yep. we have that. And the reason the background is still that color is probably because of our CSS. So let's change that as well. So I'm going to go into a page.module CSS and just delete everything. And that should change most of the styling, but let me go into our page.tsx and scroll up and I guess get rid of that import as well. I'll leave this import, but we might get some errors now that we're trying to use some styles that don't exist. Let's see if we actually do. Okay, it looks like we did not get errors, so probably those class names are just considered undefined, but we have some wonky CSS now, and I think I know what the issue is. So going back, it's probably coming from our globals.css, which even though we're not importing it in this component, it's actually being imported in the layout component all the way at the top here. So implicitly, our children are also getting that CSS and it's being applied. So I could probably either get rid of this import or I could just delete all the CSS in this file. And that's probably what I'm going to do, just deleting all of that. And now when we go back, we just have a very, very boring vanilla page, but we are learning a bit on like which files that we need to at least edit and how the CSS is working. Also, the favicon is supposed to be rendered here. I'm wondering why it's not. It might be a cache issue, and if that's the case, we can try to fix it like this by opening up our inspect tools, and then we can right-click the refresh button, at least in Chrome. And when you do that, you get the option to empty cache and hard reload, so that's what I'm gonna try, and let's see what happens. Yeah, we got the Vercel logo to come up, so that's a little trick if you didn't know it. But the reason I wanted to show it to you is because now we're actually going to change it. Okay, so I just went ahead and actually replaced that favicon. I'm not going to show you how to do it. I'll pretty much just give you this file and you can download it if you'd like. But if you want to know like how to create a favicon, it's pretty easy. You can just Google it. There are tools to do that. Like you can take an image like the YouTube logo and convert it into a favicon, which is just a really small file, as you can imagine. It doesn't have to be super sharp or anything like that. I think it's 16 by 16 pixels. Don't know how to zoom out of here, so I'm just going to get out of this file. Now, when we head back over to our app and we refresh, it actually worked this time. We didn't even need a hard refresh. But yeah, that's like the YouTube logo. It matches pretty much with the YouTube logo. That's like the real YouTube logo, except it says create next app here. So maybe we should change that to YouTube, which we can do in the layout.tsx file, the title specifically, which is part of like the metadata of this page, kind of like the header in your index.html, like the traditional way to do it. So here I'm going to change that to YouTube. And for description, I'm just going to put YouTube clone, because this is not like a real YouTube app, but maybe you want to put this something different. Maybe you're going to take this app and actually finish it, and then you can add something different here. Heading back, we see, yep, it says YouTube now. So I'll leave things here. We're just learning a bit about how like the structure of this Next.js app works. Soon we're going to learn how to actually create routes and components and pages and integrate that with our backend that we created, so that we can actually upload and process videos. And getting this to work end to end is just going to be so beautiful. I can't even wait.